Hello everyone, I'm Hey Man, the new marketing content creator at Slug Disco. As a fresh recruit of the studio and a new player to the empires of the Undergrowth, I'll be put to the test in this Let's Play series, where I'll be completing the campaign stages on impossible difficulty with a twist set down by a community of veteran players. For this video, I'll be playing stage 1.1 where I'm not allowed to build any tiles connected to each other, which creates a strange problem. A shout out to Hyox and other players on the Impossible Completionist Slug Discord for coming up with challenges for this series. Hyox even has his own YouTube channel with Empires of the Undergrowth Deathless playthroughs, so do check out his channel and their Discord with the links in the description below. Now without further ado, let's get the show on the road. Starting the game, of course, we're gonna go straight for the woodworms right next to us. We need to get those free food sources out as soon as possible, since we only start with 2 worker ants and we got a lot of digging to do. But more importantly, we need that food to start building black ants because all the rest of the food chambers are mostly guarded by enemies. Without the black ants, we can't actually extract the food we need to continue our expansion. This is where we need our worker ants to do a lot of digging. Because of the special challenge rule, we are not able to build any brute tiles next to each other, and that means the brute tiles need a lot more space to be deployed on the map, and the worker ants will have to excavate more dirt tiles. Once we have our first few black ants, we can quickly open up the first enemy chamber and start attacking. This will be fairly easy since there's only one Devil Coach Horse Beetle and we still have the support of some extra worker ants as well. Taking minimal losses in the process, this brings us extra food to start growing our army, adding more brute tiles to the ant colony. It does take a bit of time for a new brute to hatch, so the 6th black ant showed up late to the party like the 6th Power Ranger. But yeah, with everyone showed up, it is time to bust into the room of this Devil Coach Horse Beetle who was just chilling on his own and eat him alive. Jenny the worker ant got a little too overeager there, circling around to the back of the enemy and start attacking him from behind. Now we can get more black ants, but as you can see, we are running out of living space. The underground does have a bit of housing shortage, so we'll just have to order our worker ants to dig out more tiles. The next enemy chamber seems to be a double trouble with 2 enemy larvae, but we still cleared it out with no problem at all. Though at this point we've gone through most of the easy pickings around us, and the next chambers will have a bit more resistance. We'll need to make sure we're taking the next fights in full strength, so we're just kind of waiting for the new black ants to come out, while at the same time we're just gonna dig through more dirt tiles, preparing for a future expansion of the ant colony. Alright, looks like everyone's in position. Worker ants, please open up the enemy chamber. Black ants, time to do battle. Huh, I thought I turned off combat on the worker ants, but seems like they still jumped into the fight. Or they were just automatically going after the food and then got stuck on the enemy. Either ways, it doesn't matter at this point because they're already dead. This fight might be a bit too close for comfort. We're down to our last 5 ants. All of them are very depleted in HP and we're running out of food. Thankfully, the last few black ants held it together, finished off the enemy, and now we can move on to the massive food chambers behind our enemies. These are all free food, no enemies occupying them, so that's going to be a lot more resources for us to grow our colony. Of course, I know that there's an achievement that I can complete if I leave 10 wood lice till the very end before tunneling them out. But I'm just gonna play it safe in this run. Because all my tiles are disconnected, that means none of them can be upgraded, and I'll have to make up for the lack of quality in my ants with a sheer quantity advantage instead. I'll need to gather as much food as possible to pump out as many ants as possible for the tougher battles in late game. Anyways, we're gonna get stuck here for a while because these wood lice are quite tough despite being defenseless prey. It'll take some time for the black ants to dismantle them and bring them back as food reserves, so we'll be skipping the next bit. Now we're back from the build up with quite a sizable force of black ants now, 18 ants in group 2 and 6 ants in group 1, with a few more worker ants in group 3 and 4. That's more than enough ants for us to just swarm the smaller enemy chambers and start snowballing our military. The Devil Coach Horse Beetle larvae simply stand no chance in front of an overwhelming number of black ants. Now our underground dwelling is coming together nicely for the ant colony, getting a lot of living space for the black ants. Probably the most spacious black ant colony you've ever seen. Everyone has a ton of space around their own brute tiles instead of getting cramped together like other ants. It is time for us to finish off the rest of these enemies in the middle of the map before moving on to bigger prey. Now, instead of attacking them from one side, we are gonna pull off what tacticians might call a pincer attack or a flanking maneuver. We're gonna split our ants to both sides of the enemy chamber and prep themselves for the engagement. We're gonna start digging on both sides of the enemy chamber at the same time. The first one that open up will capture the attention from the enemy, leaving their backs exposed to the attack from the other side, and the second group can easily swarm them from behind. Not exactly the most complicated tactic, but I do feel that it makes the ant trade a lot more cost effectively against the enemies. Opening up a second path to the enemy chamber seems to allow more ants to get in contact with the enemy models at the same time and dish out more damage overall. Otherwise, ants might just get stuck in a narrow passage, having some trouble pathfinding towards their targets. I'm not entirely sure why, but it seems that the ants might have a bit of collision model where they can block their comrades from pathing around them and try to find a spot that is not already occupied by an ant biting, nagging at their opponent, just so they can initiate the attacks themselves. Now, the next chamber is slightly more finicky. Having adult beetles is one thing, but the other thing is that we can't flank around like the last chamber because this one is completely enclosed on all sides except one. We're not gonna push into enemy territory like what we did in the previous chambers, but instead we're gonna wait for them to come out. Once they're out in the open, my black ants, which are deployed on both sides of the battlefield, can quickly jump onto these exposed devil coach horse beetles. Another advantage that this surround gives us is that the chemical confusion ability of the devil coach horse beetles doesn't hit everything at once on our side. If we're fighting at the choke point, then our forces will be concentrated in a very small area, allowing the confusion ability to hit everyone at once, maximizing the damage it does to our combat. But because our units are quite spread out in the open, so only a small amount of our troops are affected while the rest continues to do damage to the adult devil coach horse beetle and bring it down. Now it is time for us to collect the spoils of war and continue to snowball our army. Now, taking out this group of enemy does open up the flank of another enemy chamber, so we can now repeat our flanking tactic here, positioning groups 1 and 2 on different sides of the enemy chamber with the worker ants in support. As we start the fight, you can see that a few of the ants in group 2 are quite confused on where to go. That's because the tiny passageway was fully occupied by their comrades. Once their fellow ants start dying, they can take the places of their fallen sisters and continue to fight, but before then, they are just confused about pathfinding. Anyways, the second group of ants was a little bit delayed in entering combat because of the thicker walls on the other side, but overall, minimal losses was taken and they cleaned up this group of enemy with little issue, finally giving us access to a free food chamber with no enemy presence. Now that we have more food surplus, it is time for us to build up our food storage, adding a few food tiles to make sure we have enough reserves to replenish our losses in the middle of combat. I also realized I forgot about these enemies at the bottom right of the map, so I'm just gonna quickly evict them and steal all the woodworms from their room. Our military continues to snowball, and at this point you can see that groups 3 and 4 are already squeezed off the screen. Eventually, group 2 will get pushed off as well by the ever-expanding group 1. This is why I had to build up group 2 first instead of group 1, because if I started building up group 1 first, then it might actually push group 2 off the screen way too early and I can't add new units or remove the existing units from the group 2 roster. This game, especially the grouping panel, was not built to have so many separate brute tiles in mind, and I do find it quite funny that one of the first things I'm doing in the studio is to break the game. Now with 35 ants in group 2 but less than 10 ants in group 1, it is time for us to shift our focus and now starting to grow our group 1 of black ants. After getting a few more black ant tiles, I realize I am out of food once more, so we'll have to fight more enemies and rob them of their food. The problem is that only the tougher enemy chambers remain with quite a few enemies in there plus the adult beetles, so there are gonna be some tough fights. This one on the right is rather easy. Despite having so many beetles in there, there are no adults, so I can just quickly hit them from both sides and quickly wipe them out. Though with so much extra food and a big army, we are once again running out of living space. Basically cleared out the entire bottom part of the map just so we can fit in our army. We're really not using it efficiently with only roughly a quarter of the tiles occupied. Thankfully, it's not exactly a big problem, we just need to wait for the worker ants to dig out more space for new brute tiles. Though we do need a bit more food to expand, so we'll be hitting up one of the top chambers. The two chambers over here are actually separated. We can just fight the bottom one first. The one at the top is a boss chamber, so we don't really want to open it up right now unless we want our entire nest getting annihilated by the enemies. Now let us lure out the beetles so we can strike them from two sides. The worker ants we use to open up the chamber will die, but it is a sacrifice I am willing to make. Being surrounded on all fronts, it seems the adult devil's coach horse beetle is in a bit of a panic right now. Once again, because we're so spread out, the adult beetle can't disrupt most of my ants. I didn't have much issue taking down this big group of enemy, and big groups of enemy also means more food. Look at all these bodies I'm using to fill up my covers. Anyways, it's back to the build-up phase, so I'm just gonna skip that part. Only 2 more chambers left before we have to open up the boss chamber for the final showdown. I'm gonna repeat the same flanking tactic, luring out the enemies and then surrounding them for the next chamber, fully exploiting my quantity advantage in combat. But because the black ants aren't upgraded, it did take them quite long to take down the enemies. On top of that, we did take quite a bit of casualties, so we're just gonna have to bring home the food and hatch the new broods. Thanks to all the food we picked up, we do have a massive ant colony right now. The next and second last enemy chamber also has the largest group of enemies outside the boss chamber, so this is gonna be a tough fight. The tactics are still the same though. We lure the enemies to one side of the chamber while the other group of worker ants are digging through the other side of the chamber, sending in the second group from behind. The only problem is that the enemies actually went inside the choke point to fight, so some of my black ants are a little bit lost on how to get to their targets. With this final obstacle out of the way, we have access to yet another free food chamber right behind their room. That's basically the rest of the food on the map and will give us a final few black ants to our army. In the end, I ended up with 38 ants in group 1 and roughly the same in group 2. Though at this point I did stop building new brood tiles and instead start focusing on building up my food storage. While I do want to have a big army to overwhelm the enemies, I do need enough food in the bank for replenishing losses in the middle of combat. Especially it is way more cost efficient to get a new ant from an existing brood tile than just get a new brood tile. So yeah, I'll have to keep a fine balance between the numbers of ants I have in the army and the amount of food I have in reserve for replenishing my combat losses. Right now we have 70-ish black ants with 35 on group 2 and 38 on group 1, plus still have a bunch of food lying around in reserve. Let's just wait for our ants to store up the last bit of food and then we can start this one last fight. We have a pretty sizable ant colony and any additional ant brood tiles might just be a waste and inefficient use of our food source, so yeah, we'll just start the fight soon. Just gonna order group 3 to clear out this one last dirt tile and allow our enemies to funnel out of their home a little bit faster. Unfortunately for group 3, they will be sacrificed and even actually baited out one of the adult devil coach horse beetle's ability, which is not exactly a bad trade for me. The problem is that the beetles actually split up with a small detachment of larvae protecting their flanks, delaying my group 1 from reinforcing group 2, and at the same time my entire group 2 is pretty much annihilated by the adult beetles, and group 1, after taking some initial losses, they are struggling to contain the adult beetles as well, but reinforcements are endlessly flowing into the engagement, especially picking off that smaller group of beetles allows us to have a bit more food to replenish our ranks. We have pretty much ran out of food at this point, but we are also slowly wearing down the rest of the adult beetles. We still have more new ants coming in, and adult beetles don't have any reinforcements unlike us. Being completely surrounded and overwhelmed, the final adult beetle is brought down by the sheer number of black ants, and this black ant colony has secured its first victory in this impossible community challenge run. I might seem quite comfortable in this playthrough, but in the future we're upping the difficulty, not only sourcing the challenges from veteran players, but also the community will be voting which of those challenges I'll be taking on in my future playthroughs. If you're interested in trying out Empires of the Undergrowth yourself, you can find our free demo and early access version in the Steam link in the description below. The game is getting officially released this year, so there's a lot more exciting content planned for the game, especially many more cool creatures. So be sure to stay tuned on our social media and get the latest updates to Empires of the Undergrowth.